Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I'm going to flip in right here, and this is a fantastic question because it really lets us dive into something really deeper than we talk about here, and that's the actual anabolic response of food. Well, basically he wants to know, is it true that sumo wrestlers actually have higher fat-free mass indexes, that's muscle mass, bone, everything else, than a lot of powerlifters do? Could you explain this a little bit? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing. Let's do a little bit of crafting and let's talk about this. Now this is going to get interesting because this also goes into the point about fat-free mass index of natural bodybuilders and natural athletes, drug-free at least. Because the thing is, yeah, there have been studies out there looking at sumo wrestlers, DEXA scans and things that have found a lot of sumo wrestlers have fat-free mass indexes up in the 27 to 29 range. All right, now that's kind of crazy because, I'm always telling you guys when they're at a lower body fat, the limit usually for people with 10% body fat or under 10% body fat is usually going to be a fat-free mass index of 25 without anabolic drugs. And in fact, the average anabolic steroid user in that body fat range only has a 24.5. So we're talking about pretty exceptional naturals to be at 25. Well, what in the heck does this mean? Does this mean all these sumo wrestlers are on steroids? No, it doesn't at all. What's interesting is that they're all insanely morbidly obese. They're carrying enormous, absolutely enormous amounts of body fat. Well over 100 pounds of body fat on them, usually a lot more than 100 pounds. Well, how does this work? Well, what people don't grasp is that food itself is extremely anabolic, and extreme overfeeding can produce very large anabolic signals and anabolic drive in your muscle tissue. But what I mean by extreme overfeeding, I'm talking to people who are like in 2,000 calorie surpluses for years straight. People who are like eating, who have a maintenance of say 4,000, they're eating 6,000 a day for 2 or 3 years straight. And as their maintenance goes up, they keep increasing it. So we're talking about people who are gaining, a pound a week or more continually. Do they gain enormous amounts of muscle mass? Yes. Can it actually produce drug-like muscle mass gains? That's the real question. The answer, again, yes, because how do anabolic steroids, testosterone, growth hormone, all of that cause muscle growth? By stimulating the nuclei in the muscle cell to produce IGF-1. That is the pathway by which they do it. Can excessive amounts of food do the same thing? Yes. Excessive amounts of protein and carbohydrates can do the exact same thing. It builds muscle through the same pathway that the drugs do. Now, here's the problem we get into. While this food, extreme overfeeding, is insanely anabolic to muscle tissue, it also is unfortunately more anabolic to fat tissue than it is to muscle tissue. There's the downside because, you're eating 2,000 extra calories a day, and let's say you're only gaining 500 calories worth of muscle a day at best, which you're not even going to gain that much. The rest of that calories is going somewhere. It's going mostly to your fat tissue. The majority of those calories are going to your fat tissue. But the thing is, they create such a massive anabolic signal in your muscle tissue, and they reduce protein breakdown so much that your body stops breaking down protein in general as a fuel source. It stops breaking down muscle tissue. It has such an excess of amino acids, glucose, fatty acids, everything available, your body will simply break down less muscle tissue in that environment. For even under normal conditions, it will cause it to break down because there's always tissue protein degradation going on. You're always breaking down muscle tissue all the time. But you're going to break down less of it as a result of that. So less catabolism, more anabolism. The muscles are going to grow. The problem is they get insanely fat. They get fat as fuck. Look at a sumo wrestler. But are many of them carrying far more muscle mass than some of the top natural bodybuilders out there, even without drugs? Yes, they are. Sometimes 20, 25 pounds more muscle. A sumo wrestler could hypothetically, over the course of his career, many of them have gained twice as much muscle mass as many guys can gain in a lifetime of lifting weights only. Again, it's the extreme overfeeding. The problem with that, people say, well, couldn't people just do that and diet down? No, they can't. Because here's what we found. When we talk about this fat-free mass index limit for naturals, that's after they diet down under 10% body fat. The actual act of dieting down costs you muscle mass. All right, these guys already carry a large amount of muscle. They're not going to experience noob gains. They're not going to experience noob gains. They've already passed their noob gains. They're already past what most people's drug-free limit would be if they were to stay at a reasonable body fat. So they're going to start losing muscle tissue the moment they start dieting down to any significant degree. And you know what? There are plenty of guys who at 15% body fat, 18% body fat, you put them on a DEXA scan, they're sitting at a 26, maybe even in some extreme cases a 27 fat-free mass index when you calculate your numbers. And they know they're drug-free. And I've seen guys do that. They say, but how does this 25 apply to me? Because you're at a higher body fat. If you diet down to 9% body fat, you're going to lose significant amounts of muscle tissue. That is one of the key characteristics of anabolics. Anabolics preserve muscle tissue amazingly well when people are dieting down lean. That's what people need to understand. It's not even always about the muscle gains. There are guys who actually, I've known bodybuilders even who compete in untested federations who don't even bulk on steroids. They only use gear sometimes going into a contest. A lot of the more conservative guys do that. Why? Because they want to gain a little bit of muscle and keep all of their muscle mass. They grow into a shape. All right. Normally, if you were to be 15 or 18% body fat and you diet down to 8 or 9% body fat, you are going to lose several pounds of muscle mass. If you are not using anabolic drugs, even if your diet is perfect, you're going to lose some muscle mass. If you diet down contest lean down to 5 or 6% body fat, you might actually lose like 10 pounds of muscle mass, even if your diet is perfect. The actual act of cutting down that lean, your body will not allow you to preserve all your muscle mass because you are in basically a starvation type situation. It is easier and safer from an evolutionary perspective to shed a little bit of excess muscle than it is to shed body fat at a certain point. When you start getting to a certain level of leanness, it signals your body that you are starving. It will start breaking down tissue proteins. It will start breaking down muscle tissue. You can offset that a bit by eating very large amounts of protein. You can offset that a bit by weightlifting vigorously enough to try to stimulate something, to try to stimulate a little extra growth. I mean, you can do all these things to slow down that tissue loss, to slow down that muscle loss, but you cannot stop it completely. That is a characteristic of steroid users. Guys who actually keep all of their muscle mass while getting ripped, that's a dead giveaway of steroid use. That's another reason we use the lean number to determine steroid use, not just their off-season number with the fat-free mass index, because a lot of guys might be at a 25 fat-free mass index or higher. They might be 26 without using any drugs to bulk when they're at a higher body fat. Then when they cut, if they're still sitting at 25 or 26 after the cut, and they get really lean and ripped, they use the drugs to preserve their muscle because they won't stay there. So that's what you guys need to remember. It's one thing to say, well, you're sitting there when you're at a healthy body fat, but not necessarily a really lean body fat or ripped body fat. That's one thing. It's another thing to get ripped and maintain it. You won't be able to. And many a guy has learned this the hard way. Many natural bodybuilders have learned this the hard way. That's why they end up with a much, much lower body weight sometimes when they're contest lean than they thought they would be. They're like, how did I end up 15 pounds lighter than I calculated I would be once I was finally ripped? They didn't calculate the fact that they were probably carrying a little more fat than they thought they were, so their fat-free mass index was lower than they thought, in addition to the fact that they didn't calculate that they were going to lose muscle mass. And a lot of guys don't factor that in. They honestly think they're going to get shredded while keeping all of their muscle. You're going to lose some. So that fat-free mass index of 26 can very quickly turn into a 24. Very, very fast once you start getting really ripped. So the difference here is that these sumo wrestlers aren't dieting down at all. They are literally in an anabolic state, positive nitrogen balance all the time. It's okay, come on in. I'll keep talking. I'm almost done. And in so doing, they never experience the tissue loss, the protein breakdown. And so they can reach a drug-like growth state from the continual influx of food. But again, unfortunately, they're going to gain fat 3 times faster than they gain muscle. And at the end of the day, that's how they manage to achieve that type of fat-free mass index without the use of any drugs. It's purely the anabolic response to the excessive overfeeding. But unfortunately, they end up with 150 pounds of extra unhealthy body fat. So that's not ideal for body composition. So hopefully that answers the question. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.